Good morning, it's December 18th, and this is To My Little Friends. For years, if not decades, the mainstream media in this country has been controlled by liberals and to an extent been cheerleaders for Democrats and their policies. They've structured their coverage of the news to favor that bias and hope the public accepted their stories as truth. But the public has lost trust in the media. They no longer believe what they're printing and saying. And the result is more and more people are getting their news from alternative sites. The New York Times has been on the forefront of this bias. They pretend they're unbiased and simply reporting the news, but anyone reading the paper soon comes to realize they're skewing the news to shape opinion the way they want it to be. They have a postscript on news stories that reads, quote, "When we learn of a mistake, we acknowledge it with a correction. If you spot an error, please let us know." It's hard not to chuckle at that faux humility. This is a newspaper that has the ability to choose what to report and what to ignore. When Donald Trump ran and won in 2016, the paper was filled with stories about Donald Trump's supposed ties to Russia. He was accused of colluding with Russian agents in his campaign and allowing Russian intelligence to plant stories to assist his campaign. Eventually, that attack ran out of gas, and the Mueller Commission finally had to issue a report that debunked the theory. At the same time, the New York Times showed little interest in former Federal Bureau of Investigation and CIA officials spreading disinformation about Hunter Biden's laptop. They just bought it hook, line, and sinker. For months, the Times blindly accepted reports from the administration officials that Joe Biden was of sound mind, sharp and on top of his game. He was in total control of the White House and its message. Then came the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and in that nationally televised presidential debate, the American public could see with their own eyes and hear with their own ears a president that appeared lost and befuddled. It was only then that the media was forced to give the story any attention. At the same time, they highlighted Democratic efforts to bankrupt Mr. Trump, keep him off the ballot, and put him in prison. These stories were portrayed by reporters as politics as usual, when in fact they were an unprecedented manipulation of the legal system to destroy a political opponent. The editors and reporters at the New York Times and other major news outlets in the nation designed their coverage not based on intrinsic newsworthiness, but rather what it could do to hurt Donald Trump and help his Democratic opponents. But as I like to say, the times they are changing. Despite all their efforts to hamstring Donald Trump and give a boost upwards to Kamala Harris, the voters spoke, and very loudly, I might add. And Donald Trump won convincingly in the Electoral College and even won the popular vote, something no Republican's done in 20 years. During the campaign, the New York Times basically ignored the immigration issue. But last week, they had a front page story highlighting what the public already knew, that the extraordinary level of illegal immigration over the past 4 years was the largest ever in the nation's history. Using a headline, quote, "Recent stream of immigrants is largest ever," end quote, they have tried to make us aware that the pace of arrivals exceeds any other period on record, including the peak years of Ellis Island traffic, when millions of Europeans came to the United States, end quote. Now, we're told around 60% of the immigrants who have entered the country since 2021 have done so without legal authorization. And then we're informed that while unrest in Haiti, Venezuela, and Ukraine and other places has contributed to the migrant flow, quote, "The Biden administration's policy appears to have been the biggest factor," end quote. Wow, finally they get it. Now you might ask, what's wrong with the story? The answer is nothing, but the post-election timing of such a story makes you wonder. 5 weeks after an election in which illegal immigration was foremost on the minds of many voters, the Times now allows that the current administration's lax border security policies, not terminal abroad, were the main driver of the worst migrant crisis in U.S. history. It's a story that might have been written dozens of times over the past year, but wasn't, because to do so would have helped Mr. Trump advance his signature issue and harm his political opponents, that being mostly Kamala Harris. This is what happens when the press is more interested in shaping public opinion than reporting the facts, and it happens a lot these days. In my opinion, this over-the-top bias by media outlets like the New York Times may have in fact ended up helping Donald Trump. The bias was so great that most voters could recognize it for what it was and probably objected to it. But for the most part, the media has been unable to own up to their bias. We saw what happened when the Washington Post and the LA Times refused to endorse Harris in the race. The owners said, "We're not going to endorse anybody." The staff went berserk. Some resigned in protest. To address its liabilities, the press would have to acknowledge that it has some bias in there, and fat chance that's going to happen. Like Mr. Biden, who insisted that the migrant surge was seasonal, the elite media is in denial. And like liberal Democrats broadly, too many in the media see themselves as operating at a higher level of consciousness when addressing the issues of the day. If their top concerns aren't shared by most voters, then it's the voters who have the problem. Thus, people who want tight borders are xenophobic. People who don't want to ban fossil fuels are climate deniers. People concerned about public safety are racist. And if you're a male voter who didn't cast a ballot for Ms. Harris, you're obviously sexist. Well, until the press recognizes their problem and Democrats realize they're out of touch with the common man, then both will struggle to an end, and in the end the media will be less trusted and Democrats will continue to falter at the ballot box. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, hit the subscribe button on YouTube.